100 doctors failed to save her, until the cleaning lady's 14-year-old black daughter did the unthinkable. And when Amelia Johnson, just 14 years old, raised her hand in the middle of the most important medical meeting at St. Mary's Hospital, the silence that followed was so heavy that she could hear her own heartbeat. "With all due respect, doctors," said the teenager, her clear voice cutting through the despair that hung in the conference room, "you're looking in the wrong place." Dr. Richardson, head of the neurology department and the pride of American medicine, nearly choked on his coffee. Here was a black girl, the daughter of a cleaning lady, interrupting an emergency consultation about the most mysterious patient the hospital had ever received. The 8-year-old girl in bed 304 had been in a coma for 3 weeks. None of the 100 specialists summoned from hospitals across the country could explain why she was unresponsive to any treatment. Neurological exams, blood tests, MRIs, everything was normal. It was as if the child's body had simply decided to stop functioning. "Girl, you shouldn't be here," growled Dr. Peterson, a renowned cardiologist, without even looking up from his notes. "Where's your mother? She should be cleaning the hallways, not letting you disturb professionals trying to save a life." Amelia didn't back down. She had grown up in these hallways, watching, learning, absorbing every medical word spoken around her while her mother, Linda, worked double shifts to support them. What these doctors didn't know was that Amelia had an IQ of 180 and a photographic memory, discovered accidentally when she corrected a medical dosage calculation she overheard at age 10. "The patient does not have a neurological condition," Amelia continued, completely ignoring the condescending tone. "She has lead poisoning. Severe and chronic." The laughter that echoed through the room was cruel and unanimous. Dr. Martinez, a toxicologist, shook her head dismissively. "Young lady, we've already tested for lead poisoning. 3 times. Negative results." "You tested her blood," Amelia replied calmly. "But you didn't test her bone tissue. Lead deposits in the bones when exposure is long-term and intermittent. The symptoms she presents, atypical seizures, gradual loss of consciousness, resistance to anticonvulsant medications, are classic of chronic satanism with bone redistribution." The silence now was different. Heavy, but no longer dismissive. It was the silence of professionals realizing that maybe, just maybe, they were hearing something revolutionary. Dr. Richardson adjusted his glasses, clearly annoyed at being corrected by a teenager. "And where did you get this absurd theory?" "From Google." "From Harrison's Pediatric Environmental Toxicology, 5th edition, pages 347 to 392, Amelia replied without hesitation. "And from Dr. Nakamura's articles on heavy metal redistribution during periods of physiological stress, published in the Journal of Environmental Health between 2018 and 2022. Dr. Richardson turned pale. Those were texts that not even all toxicology experts knew in detail. "Impossible," murmured Dr. Martinez. "A 14-year-old child does not have access to specialized medical literature." "I do," said Amelia, pulling a visitor's badge from the University Medical Library out of her pocket. "I've been studying here for 4 years while my mother works. No one ever questioned my presence because," she paused significantly, "apparently I'm invisible to you." As everyone processed the silent humiliation of that revelation, Amelia stood her ground like someone who had learned to turn contempt into fuel. If you're enjoying this story of a brilliant mind being underestimated, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how that genius was about to revolutionize not just a diagnosis, but the entire hierarchy of one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country. Dr. Martinez crossed her arms, her Harvard degree almost visible in the air of superiority she exuded. "Young lady, you just quoted literature that took me years to master. Are you trying to make me believe that a black teenager, the daughter of a cleaning lady, has medical knowledge equivalent to mine?" "Not equivalent," Amelia replied with a calmness that made several doctors instinctively recoil. "Superior. Because you are stuck in protocols you have memorized, while I have been learning by observing real patients for 4 years. The ensuing silence was broken by Dr. Peterson's hysterical laughter. "Observing patients? Girl, you don't have a license, you don't have supervision, you have absolutely nothing that gives you the right to have an opinion on medicine." "I have eyes," Amelia said simply. "And a memory that doesn't forget details that you ignore because they don't fit your preconceived diagnoses." It was then that she decided to show exactly what she had been observing. "Dr. Richardson, 3 weeks ago, when the patient was admitted, you ordered an MRI because you suspected a brain tumor. Do you remember what you said when the results came back clean? The neurologist hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. I don't see the relevance. You said, and I quote, interesting, the symptoms suggest an intracranial mass, but we don't see anything on the tests. Then you moved on to idiopathic epilepsy. Amelia turned to Dr. Martinez. You, in turn, ruled out poisoning because the first blood tests came back negative. You didn't investigate the child's environmental history. How could you know what? The toxicologist began. Because I was here, cleaning the floor next to my mother, while you discussed the case in the hallway as if patients were academic puzzles, not human beings. Amelia's voice rose a notch, charged with a restrained anger that had grown over years of forced invisibility. Dr. Richardson slammed his fist on the table. Enough. I will not tolerate being questioned by a minor with no credentials. Credentials. Amelia laughed bitterly. I have been present at more medical consultations in the last 4 years than some of the residents in this room. While you go out to your dinners at expensive restaurants, discussing cases as if they were intellectual trophies, I sit here absorbing every word, every decision, every mistake. That's when Linda Johnson appeared at the conference room door, still holding the mop, her face marked by the panic of discovering that her daughter had disappeared from where she was supposed to be waiting. Amelia, what are you doing here? Linda's voice trembled between relief and terror. She knew her daughter was brilliant, but she also knew the danger of a black girl confronting white authorities in positions of power. Mom, they're killing that child out of pride, Amelia said without taking her eyes off the doctor's. They know what the problem is, but they'd rather let her die than admit that a simple cleaning lady and her daughter might have the answer they can't find. Dr. Martinez turned to Linda with disdain. Mrs. Johnson, control your daughter. This is an emergency medical meeting, not a playground. With all due respect, doctor, Linda straightened her shoulders, decades of humiliation transforming into maternal dignity. My daughter has an IQ of 180, diagnosed by the psychology department of this very institution when she was 10 years old. Perhaps you should listen to her instead of belittling her. IQ of 180. Dr. Peterson let out a cruel laugh. And I'm Albert Einstein reincarnated. It was then that Amelia decided it was time to show them exactly who they were dealing with. Dr. Peterson, cardiologist trained at Johns Hopkins, specializing in 2003, currently facing medical malpractice charges in the case of Miller versus St. Mary's Hospital, case number 2023 CV 4479, where you failed to diagnose arterial blockage in a 45-year-old patient, resulting in death by heart attack. The cardiologist's face drained of color. How did you? Public records, Dr. Peterson. As well as the fact that your medical license was suspended for 30 days last year for improper prescription of controlled substances. Amelia turned to the other doctors, whose expressions of mockery had turned to shock and growing concern. Dr. Martinez, your research on environmental toxicology has been rejected by the Journal of Environmental Medicine 3 times in the last 2 years due to questionable methodology and confirmation bias. Dr. Richardson, your rate of correct diagnoses in complex neurological cases is 23% below the national average, according to a 2022 internal report. The silence was now deafening. Every doctor in the room realized that this teenager wasn't just smart, she had been systematically cataloging their mistakes, their weaknesses, their failures during years of silent observation. You underestimated me, Amelia said, her voice low but laden with an authority that no degree could confer, because you saw a black girl and assumed incompetence. But I saw you. All of you. And I know exactly who you are behind those white coats and fancy titles. Dr. Richardson stood up abruptly, his face bright red with humiliation and anger. Security. I want this family removed immediately. And I want a full investigation into how confidential information was. It wasn't confidential, Amelia interrupted calmly. It was conversations in public hallways, discussions in elevators, comments made in the presence of those you consider invisible. You talk in front of the cleaning ladies as if we were furniture. Linda squeezed her daughter's shoulder, pride and fear mingling in her features. She knew Amelia was right, but she also knew that confronting the medical establishment in this way could have devastating consequences for both of them. Dr. Martinez regained some of her composure, her voice now cold and calculating. Very well, young prodigy. If you are as smart as you claim, prove it. Prove that the patient has lead poisoning conclusively. But if you're wrong, I want you and your mother permanently banned from this institution." Amelia smiled, a smile that contained knowledge those doctors couldn't even imagine, secrets observed and memorized during years of being treated like an invisible shadow in the corridors of one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country. "Dr. Martinez," she said, her voice laden with a confidence that made some doctors involuntarily recoil, "you just made the stupidest bet of your career. Because what you don't know is that I haven't just identified the problem. I already know exactly where the source of the contamination is and why none of your tests have been able to detect it so far." "Source of contamination?" Dr. Richardson let out a bitter laugh. "Girl, you're making up conspiracy theories to make yourself look important." But Amelia was no longer paying attention to the taunts. Her eyes scanned the conference room with the precision of a scanner, cataloging every detail she had observed during years of forced invisibility. Dr. Peterson's coffee cup always in the same place. Dr. Martinez's Mont Blanc pen that she twirled nervously during difficult meetings. Dr. Richardson's habit of adjusting his glasses when he was lying. "Mom," Amelia said quietly to Linda, "you need to take me to the pediatric ward. Now." Linda hesitated, her eyes moving between her daughter and the doctors who were watching them with growing hostility. "Amelia, maybe it's better." "5 minutes," Amelia interrupted, her voice laden with an urgency that made Linda back down. "5 minutes and I'll prove that these doctors are killing that child through incompetence." Dr. Martinez stood up abruptly. "I will not tolerate this charade any longer. Security." That's when an unexpected voice cut through the air. "Wait." Dr. Michael Chun, a young Asian American resident who had remained silent in the corner of the room, stepped forward. "Dr. Martinez, with all due respect, the girl cited specific literature that I am familiar with. Literature that few residents know about." "Dr. Chun," Dr. Martinez's voice carried a veiled threat, "I suggest you don't ruin your career defending the theories of a teenager." "My career?" Chun smiled bitterly. "Doctor, 3 weeks ago I suggested additional tests for heavy metal poisoning in this same patient. You rejected my suggestion, saying I was overthinking because I am too young to understand complex medicine." The silence that followed was deafening. Amelia studied Dr. Chen's face, recognizing something familiar in his expression, the same veiled contempt she had faced for years for being different. "Dr. Chun is right," she said calmly. "But he didn't know where to look because you never investigated the patient's actual environmental history." Amelia turned to the doctors, her posture now completely transformed. "You asked about her home, about household chemicals, about school. But no one asked about what she does in her spare time. And what could an 8-year-old do that would cause lead poisoning?" Dr. Peterson crossed his arms, his tone still condescending. "Pottery painting," Amelia replied simply. "Pottery painting. In the art studio of the residential building where she lives. The same building that was built in 1952 and superficially renovated in 2019 without proper removal of lead-based paints." Dr. Martinez's expression changed slightly. "How could you know?" "Because I asked," Amelia interrupted. "While you were discussing abstract theories, I talked to her mother in the hallway. I found out that the girl spends 3 afternoons a week in the building's basement art studio, painting ceramics with paints that the owner buys from cheap suppliers." Dr. Chun picked up a notepad, clearly interested. "Intermittent exposure, poorly ventilated environment, activity involving airborne particles." "Exactly," said Amelia. "And here's what you missed. She only started attending the studio 4 months ago. The seizures began 3.5 months ago. The exposure pattern coincides perfectly with lead redistribution in bones during periods of physiological stress, such as accelerated growth in children." Linda watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and terror. She had raised a brilliant mind, but now she saw that Amelia had been systematically gathering information, building cases while she cleaned hallways. "That's speculation," said Dr. Richardson, but his voice had lost some of its previous authority. "You have no proof." Amelia smiled, a smile that contained years of silent observation and meticulous preparation. "Dr. Richardson, 15 days ago, you ordered a routine blood test that included a basic metabolic panel. Do you remember the result?" "Of course. Normal." "Normal, except for one detail that you overlooked." Amelia took a small notebook from her pocket, its pages filled with notes written in small print. "Serum iron level, 180 micrograms per deciliter. Upper normal limit, 175. A small difference, insignificant to you. Dr. Chen frowned. That doesn't indicate. On its own, no, Amelia agreed. But combined with slightly elevated C-reactive protein, a subtle decrease in hemoglobin, and, here's the part you missed, mild microcytosis that was classified as normal variation because it was on the threshold. The room fell completely silent. Amelia continued, her voice now carrying an authority that made doctors with decades of experience lean in to hear her. These values, individually normal, form a classic pattern of early-stage chronic lead poisoning. But you never connected the dots because you were looking for dramatic symptoms, not subtleties that an observant child might notice. Dr. Martinez tried to regain control. Even if your theory is correct, and that's a huge if, it doesn't explain why the direct tests for lead were negative. Because you tested at the wrong time in the cycle, Amelia replied patiently. Lead mobilizes from the bones during periods of metabolic stress. The girl's seizures follow a pattern, always after periods of prolonged fasting or intense physical activity. That's when the lead stored in the bones is released into the bloodstream. Dr. Chen was now taking notes furiously. Episodic redistribution. That would explain why blood levels fluctuate. Exactly, said Amelia. And here's what you really don't want to hear. If I'm right, this girl isn't the only one. There are at least 12 children in that building who attend the same art studio. 12 families you may be failing to protect because you're too busy protecting your egos. The weight of this revelation fell on the room like a silent bomb. If Amelia was right, this wasn't just a misdiagnosis. It was a public health crisis that had gone unnoticed for months. Linda finally found her voice. Amelia, how did you know all this? Because I listen, Amelia replied simply. For the past 4 years, while you treated me like furniture, I absorbed every conversation, every case, every mistake. I learned that real medicine isn't in books or diplomas on the wall. It's in paying attention to the details you consider irrelevant. Dr. Richardson was visibly shaken now. Even if all of this is correct, you're still a minor. You can't practice medicine. I'm not practicing medicine, Amelia said calmly. I'm practicing observation. Something you forgot to do while you were too busy impressing each other. Then she played her final card. Dr. Chen, do you have access to the patient registry system? Yes, but... Look for pediatric admissions in the last 6 months. Unexplained neurological symptoms, especially in children from the central part of the city. Specifically, look for addresses within 2 blocks of the Riverside Towers building. Dr. Chen hesitated, looking at the senior doctors. Dr. Martinez made an impatient gesture. Go ahead. When nothing comes up, we can finally end this circus. As Dr. Chen typed on the computer, Amelia remained calm, but Linda could see the tension in her daughter's shoulders. Years of preparation, of silent observation, of being underestimated, all led to this moment. My God, Dr. Chen murmured, his face turning pale. There are 7 cases. 7 children with unexplained neurological symptoms, all living within 3 blocks of Riverside Towers. The silence that followed was the sound of medical certainties crumbling and egos being shattered by the relentless logic of a teenager who had turned years of invisibility into an education that no university could offer. That was when everyone began to realize that this girl had not just identified one case. She had uncovered an epidemic that formal medicine had completely failed to recognize. 7 cases, Dr. Martinez repeated, her voice now visibly shaken. But that doesn't prove that. Dr. Chen, Amelia interrupted, completely ignoring the doctor, can you check if any of these children participated in regular artistic activities? Specifically, community art programs or pottery studios. The silence in the room was deafening as Dr. Chen typed. The sound of the keys echoed like gunshots in the tense atmosphere. Dr. Martinez had lost all color from her face, and Dr. Richardson held onto the table as if the world were spinning. My God, Dr. Chen murmured, his voice trembling. All of them. All 7 children are registered in the Riverside Community Center's Art for All program. The same program our patient attends. It was then that Amelia decided to reveal exactly what she had been planning during 4 years of silent observation. She took a second notebook out of her pocket, thicker than the first, its pages filled with maps, addresses, schedules, and meticulously collected data. Dr. Richardson, 6 months ago you treated Emma Rodriguez, age 7, for idiopathic epilepsy. Do you remember telling her parents it was genetic and incurable? Amelia opened the notebook to a specific page. Emma lives at 847 Maple Street. She participates in the art program on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The seizures began 3 weeks after she started attending the studio. How could you know that? Dr. Richardson began. Because I talked to her mother, Amelia replied calmly. While you were prescribing expensive medications that didn't work, I did what you should have done. I asked about the child's real life. She turned the page. Tommy Martinez, age 6. Dr. Martinez, you diagnosed him with neurological disorder of unknown origin. You prescribed Depakote, which cost the family $300 a month and did nothing to help. Tommy lives at 523 Oak Avenue and attends the art program on Mondays and Wednesdays. Dr. Martinez's face was now ashen gray. You have no right to. Jessica Wong, age 9, Amelia continued relentlessly. Dr. Peterson, you suggested exploratory heart surgery because she had unexplained arrhythmias. Her parents nearly sold their house to pay for the procedure. Dr. Peterson stood up abruptly. That's invasion of privacy. You can't have access to medical information. I don't need to, Amelia said with a calmness that made several doctors recoil. I just need to talk to the families you abandoned after failing to cure them. Linda watched her daughter with a mixture of terror and admiration. She realized that Amelia hadn't just been studying medicine, she had been building a case against the entire medical system of the city's most prestigious hospital. Dr. Chun, Amelia said, can you do me a favor? Can you call the public health department and report a possible mass lead poisoning? Use the data you just found. Wait. Dr. Martinez's voice came out louder than she intended. We can't create unnecessary panic based on the theories of a minor. Amelia smiled, a smile that contained years of humiliation turned into power. Dr. Martinez, are you concerned about unnecessary panic, or the fact that 7 families may sue this hospital for medical malpractice when they discover that a 14-year-old identified in 15 minutes what you failed to diagnose in months? The silence that followed was brutal. Every doctor in the room realized the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just about misdiagnoses, it was a professional and legal catastrophe. Furthermore, Amelia continued, opening a third section of her notebook, I have already contacted the public health department. 3 days ago. The words fell like bombs in the absolute silence of the room. Impossible, whispered Dr. Richardson. Amelia took a small tape recorder out of her pocket. Inspector Sarah Chun, no relation to Dr. Chun, from the Department of Public Health. Conversation recorded 3 days ago, with her permission. She pressed play. The inspector's official professional voice filled the room. Miss Johnson, based on the information you have provided, we are launching an immediate investigation. If your analysis is correct, we are dealing with a public health emergency that could affect dozens of children. Amelia turned off the recorder. The inspector will be here in 2 hours with a full investigation team. She asked me to identify all the medical professionals responsible for the cases I identified. Dr. Martinez was now visibly shaking. You planned this. You orchestrated all of this. I observed, Amelia corrected. For 4 years, I watched you fail patient after patient because you were too busy protecting your egos to really listen. But when I started to see a pattern that you completely ignored, I decided to act. Dr. Peterson sank into his chair, reality hitting him like a hammer. If we're wrong, if this girl is right, our careers. Your careers are the least of your problems, Amelia said calmly. 7 children, Dr. Peterson. 7 children who could have suffered permanent neurological damage because you chose to be arrogant rather than curious. Then she played her final card. Dr. Chun, can you access the lab's chemistry system? Specifically, can you check whether any of the blood tests from the last 3 weeks were tested for lead using the atomic spectrometry method rather than the standard colorimetric method? Dr. Chun typed with trembling fingers. No, they weren't. We always use the colorimetric method, which is 40% less sensitive for detecting low levels of organic lead, Amelia explained patiently. Especially the kind that comes from counterfeit paints in poorly ventilated environments. The room was now completely silent. Each doctor processed the reality that a teenager had not only identified a problem they had missed, but had anticipated each of their defenses and countered them with surgical precision. "There's one more thing," Amelia said, her voice now carrying an authority that made doctors with decades of experience feel like students. "Dr. Richardson, Dr. Peterson, Dr. Martinez, you assume I'm just a smart girl who got lucky." She paused, letting the suspense build. "But what you don't know is that 3 months ago, I sent my academic portfolio to Harvard Medical School. Yesterday, I received their response." Linda took her daughter's hand, realizing that the story was about to take a turn she hadn't even imagined. Amelia took an official envelope with the Harvard logo out of her pocket. Early admission, with a full scholarship, to start at age 16. The committee was particularly impressed with my independent research work on differential diagnostics in underserved pediatric populations. Dr. Martinez looked as if she were about to faint. "Harvard? You're going to study at Harvard?" "Actually," Amelia said with a smile that revealed years of quiet determination, "I'm going to study where Harvard considers me qualified to teach. Because part of my admission includes a joint research program with the Pediatric Toxicology Department." The silence that followed was the sound of worlds collapsing and hierarchies being rewritten. A black teenager, the daughter of a cleaning lady, had not only humiliated the most prestigious doctors in the city, she had proven herself more qualified than they were for the work they did. Dr. Richardson tried one last desperate gambit. "Even if all of that is true, you still violated protocols, invaded medical privacy." "I didn't violate anything," Amelia interrupted calmly. "I talked to families you abandoned. I used publicly available information. And I identified a pattern that any competent doctor should have seen." The door to the room opened, and Inspector Chun entered with 2 assistants, both carrying testing equipment. "Ms. Johnson," the inspector said professionally, "we're ready to begin the investigation. Can you show us where the index patient is?" As the inspector spoke, Amelia looked at each doctor in the room. Dr. Richardson was as pale as a sheet. Dr. Martinez was holding onto the table as if she were about to faint. Dr. Peterson was staring at his hands as if he couldn't believe what had happened. "Inspector Chun," Amelia said, her voice now carrying a dignity that transcended her age, "before we go to see the patient, there is something these doctors should know." She turned to Linda, who nodded with a mixture of pride and concern. "For 4 years, you treated me as if I were invisible. You talked about patients in my presence as if I were a piece of furniture. You made comments about my mother, about our social status, about our place in this hospital." Her voice rose slightly, charged with years of pain transformed into power. "You never imagined that a poor black girl could not only understand medicine, but master it better than you. And that arrogance, that prejudice disguised as scientific superiority, almost cost 8 children their lives." The weight of her words echoed in the room like a final judgment. Each doctor realized that this moment would be remembered not as the day they were corrected by a patient, but as the day they were exposed by someone they had completely underestimated. And as Amelia walked toward the door to show the inspector where the patient she had correctly diagnosed was, one question hung in the air. In a world where knowledge and competence were supposedly valued above all else, how had it been possible for the very defenders of that system to fail so spectacularly to recognize genius when it didn't come packaged in the way they expected? 2 years later, Amelia walked the halls of Harvard as the youngest researcher in the history of the Pediatric Toxicology Program. St. Mary's Hospital had implemented her integrated diagnostic protocols, saving dozens of children. Dr. Martinez lost her license after the investigation revealed systematic negligence. Dr. Richardson was fired when other families sued the hospital. Dr. Peterson filed for bankruptcy while paying damages. Linda now ran the community medical education program Amelia had created. "Proud of you," she whispered, watching her daughter receive the Young Scientist of the Year award. Dr. Chun, promoted to department head, watched in awe. "She revolutionized the way we view medicine." "Arrogance is blind," Amelia reflected during her speech. "But humility sees truths that titles cannot teach." As she spoke to an audience of doctors who now respected her, she remembered her mother's words, "Knowledge without compassion is just ego in disguise." Amelia proved that genius knows no color, class, or age. Only hearts willing to learn. If this story inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that show how true knowledge always triumphs over prejudice, turning injustice into revolution.